Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to another lesson with Mr. Fieck. Today we are going to compare fractions and specifically looking at making equivalent fractions from building off of what we talked about yesterday and how to compare fractions, and today focusing a little more on making and building equivalent fractions. So the learning target or main idea for today is that I can make and recognize equivalent fractions. And this is the second lesson in Unit 7. And remember, this is kind of a culmination or a wrap-up of everything we've learned throughout our fourth grade year throughout math. So let's look at it. It says, use the bars below to draw and shade two fractions that are equivalent to 2/3. For each new fraction, write an expression to show how you multiply both the numerator and denominator to make a new fraction. So this, again, should be review. So here, our numerator tells us how many of the equal parts we're looking at. For a fraction, our wholes have to be the same. Again, we can't compare fractions if our wholes are not exactly the same. So in this case, all of these rectangles are exactly the same size, and they're all broken up into exactly 3 equal parts, and that's what our denominator tells us. It's how many equal parts it's broken up into. Our numerator, the top number, tells us how many of those parts we're looking at. So in this case, 2/3, 2 of the 3 parts, okay? So for this one, and we've talked earlier this year when we had our unit on fractions, how to make equivalent fractions. Well, you just multiply the numerator and the denominator by the exact same number. So you could double them and double them and keep doing that. So if I wanted to do that, remember, keep it simple. So if I wanted to multiply them both by 2 and by 2, that means my fraction would be 4/6. And by doing that, all I'm saying is I'm just going to break these each into half. So now I have 6 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I want to shade in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 6 parts. And look, I've shaded in the exact same amount as 2/3. Now, if I had 4/6, I could double them each again. Or maybe I want to just multiply them by 4, and I get 2 times 4 is 8, and 3 times 4 is 12. Well, here I split them each in half, and now by breaking them up into halves again, I'm just going to change color so you kind of see. I'm just breaking those halves in half again as best I can. Now I'm doing this freehand, so it's not exactly, but fractions should be. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 equal parts, and I want 8 of those 12 parts. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if I say, look at each of these all came right down here and are the exact same amount. They're equal. No matter how many parts I broke them into, it's just the bigger your denominator is, the smaller your parts become, and the more you have to include in your denominator to get there. The smaller, like in this case of the 3, our denominator is, the bigger our total pieces is, which means the less amount we have to do. So let's take a look at the same thing for the second one. We have a total of 5 pieces. That's what our denominator is telling us. And we're looking at 3 of the 5 pieces. So again, let's keep it simple. And if I want to, again, do it by 2 and 2, that tells me I'm doing 6/10. So all I'm doing is breaking each of these in half because my denominator doubled up here. So I'm going to have twice as many pieces. And then if I shade in 6 of the 10, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right here is 6 of the 10 pieces, and that's the exact same amount as what was shaded up above. So they're equivalent fractions. Another way you could check to see if they're equivalent is, like we talked about in the previous lesson, is if we're comparing fractions and we cross multiply and climb the ladder. Well, 10 times 3 is 30, 5 times 6 is 30. Hey, look at that. 30 equals 30. So 6/10 is equivalent to 3/5. Okay, If we wanted to go again, and so if I split each of these in half, and if I wanted to multiply by 4s again, I could go by 4 and by 4, and that would get me 12 20ths. Oh, and look at my denominator doubled, my numerator doubled, so they're going to be equivalent. But then all that's telling me is I would split each of these in half again, so that I would have a total of 20 pieces that I'm looking at, 20 equal parts that I broke it into, and I want to shade in 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There you go. Then I shaded in 12 of the 20 pieces, and again, they're equivalent. And if I wanted to check, I could do 6/10. Well, 10 times 12 is 120. 6 times 2 is 12 with a 0, so 20 times 6 is 120, and 120 is equivalent to 120. So they're equivalent fractions. So there you go. Making equivalent fractions. The key is whenever you make equivalent fractions, you either have to multiply the numerator and denominator by the exact same number. So I'll give you one example here. Is if I have the fraction of 3/8 and I want to make an equivalent, I could just multiply times 2/2, and I would get 6/16. Well, 3/8 is equivalent to 6/16. Or you can also, if you want to simplify, you could divide both numbers. So if I have 4/10, I have 4/10. Both of those are even numbers, so I know I can divide by 2 and so I could divide by 2/2, and I would get 2/5. So 4/10 would be equivalent to 2/5. So you either have to multiply numerator and denominator by the exact same number, or you can simplify it and divide both the numerator and denominator by the same number. That is a really simple way of how to make equivalent fractions. I hope this helped as a review. Go make it a great day, boys and girls.